Konnichiwa, street dogs. Watashi wa Eric Kim desu. So this is the turbo thought of the day, or one of many turbo thoughts. Why I find notions of, chromatism or chroma, or essentially referring people by the skin pigment, quite problematic. So, I am very anti notions of calling people white, colored, black, yellow, red, orange, purple, pink, green, and this is why. So, this is where thinking about language is really important, because inherent in these words are essentially racist ideas. What up, Liz?
Hey, how are you?
You get your swell on?
Trying.
Get the gains.
Always.
I like your face mask. So for example, if you call somebody colored or black or yellow or whatever, red, you're essentially it's inherent into the language means other, foreign, strange, barbaric, cannot be trusted, dangerous, whatever. And if you study etymology, I'm a big fan of Wiktionary.org. If you study the ancient Greeks and the ancient Romans, the word Niger, N-I-G-E-R, it's similar to the word night, and essentially, the Romans and the Greeks, right? They're kind of like more olive oil skin toned. Like if you've seen a modern day Greek person or an Italian person, that's like what they essentially looked like. And let us assume that ancient Athens or ancient Greece was the apex of culture and civilization. They essentially looked like what the typical American might think is Middle Eastern. So, certainly there's a lot of genetic and racial diversity in Greece, but for the most part, people had a certain skin tone or a Pantone that was kind of more like darker olive oil, brownish, right? And because they're in the Mediterranean, they're closer to the equator, and technically when we think about white people, we tend to talk about like Northern Europeans, right? So people from like Sweden, Norway, essentially the higher north you go, to the North Pole, people have lighter skin pigment because, like for example, I was in Umeå, spelled U-M-E-A, Umeå, or Umeå, Sweden. Dude, in the winter time, I kid you not, there's literally only 30 minutes of sunshine a day. So consider, if you want to maximize your vitamin D's, your body is not gonna produce a lot of melanin or the skin pigment tone in order for you to absorb the maximum amount of sunlight, right? However, if you're closer to the equator where it's like sunny as hell, right? Then your body's gonna produce more melanin in order to offset the oversaturation of vitamin D's or sunlight. So even for myself, I'm Korean. I'm technically East Asian. My skin pigment is like, the thing that's interesting about Korea, right? We got 4 distinct seasons, and so I think Koreans tend to be a little bit more on the fairer side, which means during the winter time when there's no sunlight, our skin goes pretty pale in order to absorb more sunlight, whereas in the summertime it gets pretty freaking hot. So even for myself, you might not noticed, I've been kind of getting my tan on, and I'm just walking around the sun a lot. So even when I used to play tennis in high school, my skin tone fluctuates hugely depending on whether it's winter or summer. And this is actually why I'm happier when I'm in the East Coast, because the East Coast weather is actually more similar to Korean weather where there's 4 distinct seasons. So, you know, in Korea it snows, East Coast it snows too. So, like, as I honestly think that California is very overrated, and this is coming from a native-born Californian who was born in the Bay Area and lived most of his adult life there. I think the East Coast in terms of weather is far superior. The dynamic range of weather is better, and if you want to be happier, I would actually say move to the East Coast. I'm actually very happy here in Providence, Rhode Island. I think it's the best city in America, maybe even the world. But anyways, let me continue my spiel. So when you call somebody white, you're essentially inherent in the language means chosen, worthy, pure, superior, great. And taking it back to the ancient Romans and the Greeks, right? Essentially, you know, you could only measure other people according to your own standard. So, like, let us consider if the ancient, you know, Greeks or Romans, whatever, they're kind of this Mediterranean, like kind of olive oil, you know, kind of like brownish color. Anyone who's significantly darker than them is a foreigner. And, you know, even when they dealt with the Ethiopians way back in the day, they looked at the Ethiopians with suspicion because the skin pigment is different, right? And so, for example, you know, I think it's human nature that you look at anybody who kind of doesn't look like you with suspicion. And, you know, this is kind of a stupid bias too, but if I meet somebody else who is like Asian or East Asian or Korean, like either consciously or subconsciously, I kind of have a greater predilection to them, that like I favor them a little bit more because they kind of look like me. Now this is totally unfair, but I think it's just the human bias, and at least I know that I'm personally aware of it. But anyways, so if we keep using these terms like colored, white, black, you know, yellow, red, whatever, it's hugely problematic because we're going to continue to propagate racism and morphologyism and colorism and classism and, you know, chromatism, and which is kind of our unintended side consequence. So for example, let's imagine America 500 years from now, and I'm quite certain America will still, let's say 300 years from now. I mean, America's been around roughly around 300 years, and according to Nassim Taleb's Lindy effector rule, high likelihood America will be at least around for another 300 years. I'm not sure if America will be around 2,000 years from now, but I could say with a high certainty America will be around 300 years from now. So let us imagine America 300 years from now. You look at the Bay Area, you look at the East Coast, whatever. Essentially everyone is mixed race now, right? Like, you know, it's quite common that you see Caucasian dudes marry East Asian women, right? Pretty common trend I see, which means you think there are kids, right? Let's say, you know, I'm Caucasian, I'm part Irish, I'm part German, I'm part Polish, Russian, Swedish, from Amsterdam, Dutch, whatever I may be. Let's say my wife is like Japanese or Korean or Chinese or South Asian, like Indian or whatever. My kids, are they gonna be white, colored, or something else? And certainly like 300 years from now, we're all gonna be kind of mixed and kind of like more like mocha colored. So in that case, who's going to be white anymore? And even it's funny because you think about the history. Once upon a time, the Polish people weren't considered white. Jewish people were not considered white. Italians weren't considered white. You know, Russians weren't considered white. Germans weren't considered white. The Irish aren't considered white. And so let's consider, like, who is really white in America?